Namo Buddhaya. Yeah, I want to begin by wishing all of you who are watching this event to wish you all the blessings of Vesak. And I want to particularly thank the most venerable Brahma Pandita and the organizing committee for inviting me to give a talk today. The subject that I was asked to speak about is compassion in times of crisis, Buddhist practices in healing the global community. I think we're all aware that the global community today is facing many crises. In fact, we might be living through one of the most critical periods in human history when the very prospect of human life on Earth is in serious danger. But amongst the many crises that we're facing today, I want to focus in my talk just on two major crises, which are closely connected at the root. One is economic inequality and persisting poverty, and the other is environmental devastation, particularly climate change. And I would say that those are the two overwhelming problems that we're facing, problems that put the very future of humanity in danger. I don't like to overwhelm people with statistics, but to look at the problem of inequality and poverty, it's useful to look at some figures on the distribution of the world's wealth. And what I found by consulting some websites, economic websites, is that the top 1% of the world's population owns 43% of the world's wealth, while the bottom 53% owns only 1.5% of the world's wealth. That is, the bottom half of the world's population owns just a little more than 1% of the wealth, while the top 1% owns almost half of the world's wealth. That is an indication of the extreme injustice, economic injustice to which our economic system is leading. And these figures should not be taken as just abstract numbers, but when we look at the impact of these figures on the actual lives of people, we see that poverty means chronic hunger and malnutrition. It means homelessness. It means diseases that can be easily cured with sufficient medical care. It means lack of land and resources. It means lack of drinkable water. And it means for too much of the world's population, an early premature death. Even here in the United States, which is sometimes imagined to be the wealthiest country in the world, we find severe economic inequality. In the US, the top 1% owns 43% of the wealth of the country. And among the economically developed countries, the United States has the greatest degree of income inequality, the lowest government spending on social programs, the lowest score on the material well-being of children, the highest infant mortality rate, and the very high homicide rates, and a large prison population. And the reason why greater economic equality is so important, because when there is economic inequality in a country, that inequality translates into shorter lifespans, worse health, higher levels of infant and material mortality, lower levels of trust among people, more family violence, more teen pregnancies, more family violence in broken homes, whereas in countries with greater economic equality, there are longer lifespans, better health, higher levels of reported happiness, less crime, and a general improvement in the quality of life for everybody in the country. And so we can understand that economic inequality and poverty are not inevitable, not irreversible. They are the result of a series of decisions, political decisions, that can be reversed to create greater equality. A stronger safety net is essential to provide support for people in need, but it is not sufficient as a final solution to the problem of poverty and inequality. Fundamental transformations of the system are needed to create an economy, a social order, and a political system that can work for all, that can promote the common good. Okay, so on one side, we face economic inequality and poverty. On the other side, the other major problem we face is environmental devastation, most visible in the form of climate change. Climate change has been accelerating year after year, reaching dangerous levels that are already having a catastrophic impact. It's manifest in the form of destructive wildfires, floods, violent hurricanes, longer droughts, longer heat waves. So that because of our impact on the climate, the future of human life hangs in the balance. Already, regions of the earth are becoming increasingly uninhabitable. I read that last week in Pakistan and northern India, the temperature had even gone up as high as 128 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pushing the very upper level of human survival. And if this trend continues and becomes irreversible, millions of people will die. We're altering the geophysical environment in ways that have never taken place before in historical times. And we cannot foresee the full impact, but we have to act to stop the causes of climate change, to reverse it, and to create a climate that is truly conducive to the flourishing of human beings. And so we have these two interrelated problems of economic inequality and persisting poverty and escalating climate change. And the task that faces us as Buddhists and as moral beings with a sense of conscience is what we can do to address these two interrelated, overwhelming, challenging problems. I would say, even though in Buddhism we extol such qualities as generosity, loving kindness, and goodwill, I would say that on their own as purely inward virtues, these are not enough. Even compassion as a purely internal disposition of the mind is also not enough. These qualities are necessary, precious, and valuable, but they also have to be joined to a sharp diagnosis of our current predicament and a determination to make fundamental changes. changes in the systems, institutions, programs, and policies that govern our lives, changes in the dynamics that determine the fate of the 8 billion people who live on this planet. I would say that at the basic level, what we are dealing with here is what I call an inversion of values, a distortion of values, whereby monetary values, market values, returns on investments, the increasing financialization of all aspects of life have come to dominate genuine human values. They've pushed to the sideline the values that contribute to a true enrichment, deepening, and ennoblement of human life. And so in order to protect ourselves, to contribute to the flourishing of human life, we have to understand at a deep level this inversion of values and find ways to return to a code of genuine life-promoting, life-enhancing values. One tool that Buddhism offers us to understand our present predicament is the template of the Four Noble Truths. So when the Buddha wants to show us how to eliminate suffering, he doesn't just prescribe palliatives, just means to deal with the outer manifestations of suffering, but he takes us to a deep analysis of the underlying causes of suffering and tells us to eliminate those causes. So in a similar way, we have to view the above symptoms of social decline, economic inequality, environmental destruction, climate change, not as isolated phenomena, but as aspects of a common pathology, a common malady, connected at a deep, fundamental level, stemming from the same distortions in the dominant social and economic paradigm in which we are embedded. And these distortions, in turn, come from basic distortions in the mind, in our point of view, our attitudes, our motivations, the deep undercurrents of our emotional life. And so from a Buddhist perspective, we would say that these distortions all arise from ignorance and craving, avijja and tanha, or from greed, hatred, and delusion, which are locked in a mutually reinforcing relationship. But when we look at the underlying forces plunging us into chaos and disaster, we have to be more specific. We have to understand exactly how ignorance and craving are working to generate these twin problems of economic inequality, disparities of wealth between the rich and the poor on one side, and ecological devastation, climate change, the pollution of the Earth's geophysical system. Okay, so when I try to take a very broad overview of the dominant social and political and economic systems that govern our lives, I diagnose and analyze it in terms of what I call a deep meta program that underlies our problems. And there are different aspects to this meta program. One is even a metaphysical underlying cause, and that deep underlying metaphysical cause can be called the idea of personal atomism, the idea that we possess a private individual self, which is the standpoint from which we look out upon the world. We take ourselves to have some kind of inner substantial self, which has an ultimate reality, an intrinsic inherent nature of its own. And that is our true identity. And when we identify with that individual atomistic self, then we see ourselves in intrinsic competition with other people who we view also as ultimate individual selves. So the idea of the inner subjective self leads to the tendency to objectify others, to see others as objects, and to look upon the natural world, the environment, also through the standpoint of objectification, of treating nature just as a bunch of objects to be exploited and utilized for our own personal benefit. So we exploit others. So we have economic systems which contribute to the exploitation of others, where we have the capitalists, the owners, the heads, the elite, the financial and corporate elite, utilizing others as workers and consumers to contribute to their own wealth and power. And again, from the standpoint of the individual self, we objectify nature and we try to exploit all of the resources of nature to produce products to be sold on the marketplace. And so this is how this metaphysical standpoint of the ultimacy of the private self underlies our predicament. And once we take the standpoint of the ultimacy of the individual self, this leads or induces a code of conduct by which we seek to maximize our own personal self-interest. And so nature turns into a bundle of commodities. Other people, we're alienated from other people. We compete with other people. And we see that each of us is in this competitive race to prevail, to come out on top. And our conduct is driven by this need, this perpetual need to solidify our sense of selfhood by maximizing our own wealth, our own position, our own power, and to prevail over and to dominate other people. And so the consequence of this standpoint of the personal self and the drive to acquire more and more is that all the realms of true value become dominated by market values, transformed into market values. And so we go ahead recklessly exploiting the Earth's ecosystems. We reduce people to consumers and workers. The people who prevail in this kind of economic system try to manipulate others with fear for their material security. And so people become pitted against one another, failing to recognize our common interests. And we fail to replace this present predatory system with another system that will contribute towards true human flourishing, to the common good. And so if we are going to deal effectively with the major problems that we're facing, it's not enough just to deal with them at the level of policies, but we have to alter our point of view, our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of others, and our understanding of the world in which we're embedded. And this is where Buddhism can contribute valuable insights and values to motivate us. First, in contrast to the metaphysical premise of the discrete, individual, private self, Buddhism says that idea is a fundamental delusion. But in reality, from the standpoint of true insight, we are intrinsically interconnected and interdependent. Our very being exists in essential relationship with others. We depend upon countless other people. We depend upon countless other living beings. We are just a node in the vast, intricate web of life, intimately connected with the natural environment and with the entire cosmos. We emerge out of the entire cosmic process. We are an inherent part of the cosmic process, and our task is to contribute to promote the well-being of others who are involved, integrated into this cosmic process. And so when we recognize our essential interconnectedness with others, this entails a sense of universal responsibility. Of course, we cannot influence everybody and everything, but we should recognize that our thoughts, attitudes, and actions have, to some extent, the capacity to influence everything else. We can imagine that the world in which we're living is like a vast lake, and our own thoughts and actions is like throwing little stones into that lake. Each little stone that we throw creates a ripple which spreads through the lake. And even though at the other end of the lake, the ripple might be barely visible, but that stone that we throw will have some effect, however slight it might be, even on the waters at the other end of the lake. But even though we might not be able to contribute much by acting individually, when we join with others and collaborate with others in pursuing shared goals, then we can have a significant impact, a transformative impact on the systems, the social, economic, and political systems in which our lives are entwined, in which our lives are embedded. Okay, another principle that Buddhism can teach us is about the nature of true happiness. So true happiness for Buddhism doesn't come from pursuing one's own private interest at the expense of others. It doesn't come about just by trying to increase our wealth, our power, our position, by seeking to dominate others and come out as number one. But true happiness comes from participating fully and freely in various domains of true value, which begin at the most basic level, in meeting our material needs. Since in order to thrive, of course, we need sufficient food, a clean environment, drinkable water, good health, and so forth. But then we have to be able to enter into meaningful, fulfilling relationships with others, relationships which give us a deeper sense of meaning, which lift us up. We have to be able to form fulfilling friendships, collaborate and cooperate with others, and join hands with others in pursuing the general good of our communities and our societies. That brings a deeper sense of inner fulfillment. Happiness also depends on a sense of communion with nature, of being able to go out into the wild, to leave behind the towns and cities and to enjoy the natural world. And even if we live in cities, we should be able to go out from time to time in large parks, in forests, and to enjoy the refreshment of being part of the natural order. And then, according to Buddhism, at the highest level, ultimate happiness depends upon the inner cultivation of the mind, on unfolding our spiritual potential to eliminate and to eradicate greed, hatred, and delusion, to develop our moral conduct, concentration, and wisdom, and through wisdom to cut off the defilements and realize the ultimate happiness, which is nibbana or nirvana. And so how are we to apply this quest for genuine values in concrete, specific ways? So I would say that what we need to guide us in pursuing the necessary type of social transformation is a set of guidelines, which I call the Dharma of engagement, critical to our own time. So I've enumerated a number of factors here, which are taken from Buddhism, but they're not expressed exactly in the terms of classical Buddhism. So the first of these is what I call discernment. And we could see this as corresponding perhaps to right view of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so what I mean by discernment is a clear and deep understanding of the detrimental social and political forces at work in our society and in the world at large. So this is like when the Buddha passes from the first noble truth to the second noble truth, he looks in and inquires, what are the underlying roots of dukkha, of suffering? And so when we look at a dysfunctional social and political order, where we have glaring economic inequalities, persistent poverty, environmental destruction, climate change, the rise of autocratic forms of government, hatred, militarism, war. What are the deep underlying roots of those problems? So we have to look into the psychological roots from which those problems arise. And understanding the roots of the problem must also be coupled with an uplifting moral vision of an alternative system conducive to the greater human good. We must have a vision of a world in which there prevails social justice, a world in which there's shared prosperity, a world in which nobody has to go hungry, nobody has to face the ravages of ecological devastation, a world where people don't have to migrate from their original homelands to other countries because their homelands have become uninhabitable. And so we have to have a vision of a truly just, prosperous, and sustainable social order. And that has to be the object of our aspiration. And this vision should extend horizontally, that is geographically, to embrace all human beings across the planet, not thinking only of the people of our own country or our own community, but we have to take all humanity in our range of vision clear across the earth, but not only contemporary humanity. We also have to need a sense of responsibility to future generations. We have to recognize the impact of our own actions in the present on the next generation the generation after that, and all the generations right down the line. And this is particularly relevant to the problem of climate change, because at the rate that we are burning fossil fuels, the rate that we are discharging, emitting carbon emissions into the atmosphere, the planet is heating up at such a rate that even the generation of children, the people who are now children, when they reach adulthood, they're going to face a world which is increasingly unlivable. And so if that's the problem facing the present generation of children, what is it going to be like for the next generation after that? If we continue on our present trajectory, by the end of this century, this planet is going to be unlivable. And so we have to recognize the long-term consequences of our present actions. Then the second step or phase in this Dharma of social engagement, I call solidarity. This is a recognition of the essential unity of all people, understanding that our differences are secondary to our essential unity, that every human being is alike in that we all seek to avoid suffering, and we all seek to achieve happiness. We all seek to live and to live abundantly, and we all fear death, particularly an early death. And so when we recognize our essential unity with others, we will come to see others not as mere means to our own fulfillment, not as competitors, not as alien, not as the others, but we will regard others as essentially the same as ourselves. And this will dispose us to cooperate with others rather than to compete with them, to share with them rather than to grasp more and more for ourselves, to pursue equality rather than domination. Out of the sense of solidarity come the third and fourth phases or aspects of this Dharma of engagement. The third is love or loving kindness. So this corresponds to metta or maitri, the wish to promote the well-being, safetyness, and the well-being, safety, and happiness of others. And the fourth is compassion, the movement of the heart when we face the suffering of others and the heartfelt urge to alleviate the suffering of others, to remove the causes of their suffering, and to see that they can emerge from suffering and achieve true happiness. So here we have loving kindness and compassion. The next phase or step is what I call justice. And this, in traditional Buddhist terminology, might be represented by one nuance, one aspect of the word dharma. So justice here is the quest to secure social, political, legal, and racial justice based on the principle that all people should be treated fairly, that all should be free to actively shape and contribute to the institutions and policies that govern their lives. Here in the United States, the country where I live, this particularly involves addressing the problem of racism in its various forms. This is a legacy that we inherit from our own past and that is still contributing to shape present attitudes, policies, and practices. But other countries will face their own challenges to this demand for inclusive justice justice that extends to the entire population. The next phase is something closely connected with justice, but it's a little bit different. It's called equity. And this is the principle that all people should receive an adequate share of the material resources of life, as well as healthcare, education, a satisfactory education, and a clean environment. So this involves providing people with adequate housing, sufficient food, good schools, and perhaps even a basic living income. And the seventh phase in this Dharma of social engagement is peace. That means promoting peaceful solutions to communal, national, and global problems, not resorting to conflicts, to violence, to seeking to impose one's will on others, or the will of one's own community on others through violent means, but seeking to solve problems through discussions, through negotiations, through compromise, and always trying to seek the solution which will most satisfactorily meet the needs of everyone else, even if we can't always obtain what we want for ourselves, but we have to recognize sometimes that it's necessary to compromise our own demands in order to resolve our differences peacefully. Okay, the requirement of peace also means that we need a new approach to foreign policy, particularly the wealthy countries of the world, the countries located mainly in the northern part of the hemisphere, have to be more willing to share our resources with the less fortunate. And instead of spending so much on our military budget, we have to transform those expenditures to a peace budget aimed at addressing global poverty so that we can ensure that everyone obtains the basic necessities of life. Okay, the eighth factor that I have listed here in this Dharma of engagement is courage. And courage means the willingness to act without fear, without hesitation, on behalf of people in need, whether near or distant, including future generations. The courage to stand up and act, to defend, to promote a living planet. And to promote a living planet means that we have to be ready to move away from our growth economy, the economy committed to constant in ever expanding growth, and to move away from a consumerist culture driven by the need to turn out ever new commodities. Instead, we have to adopt a more humble economy, a steady state economy grounded in the principle of sufficiency, where we're aiming at quality of life, not at turning out ever new inventions, to be constantly expanding production and consumption. And so here we could see the relevance of the Buddhist values of contentment and being satisfied with little. So here I think Buddhist monastics can form a model for the greater society, because we show by our lives that it's possible to be happy, to be fulfilled, to experience inner contentment, even while living just with the simplest, most basic requisites of life. And in this way, by extolling the virtues of simplicity and contentment, Buddhism can help contribute a model of a steady state economy grounded in the principle of sufficiency. Okay, so these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you today. Some ideas on how Buddhism and Buddhist values and practices can contribute to heal the global community. I hope these ideas will be useful to you. And again, I want to end by wishing everybody the blessings of a happy Vesak. Thank you so much for your attention. Bhavatu Sabha Mangalang Rakantu Sabha Devata Sabha Buddhanu Bhavena Sabha Dhammanu Bhavena Sabha Sanganu Bhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te.